about lead service lines and get into the question of replacement. And today's discussion was really kind of developed out of some questions that I've gotten this year and just in general in recent years, as lead service line replacement has become widely talked about in the industry. Obviously, this is, as we all know, the Flint water crisis. This has kind of spurred on a lot of this discussion and a lot of the work that's going on in the industry. Part of the basis for today's discussion, the industry, AWWA and EPA have come out and are supporting full replacement of lead service lines. There are inventory requirements for private property, for the private property side, in the lead and copper rule revisions, and so there's questions about replacement. I think replacement is where the industry has landed. At the same time, as some of us may know, there are systems out there more on the rehabilitation side that can, I think, service these lines, and I think there's a lot of questions as to where that leaves those systems if the industry is really advocating for replacement. So that's kind of just to set the table a little bit for our discussion today. That's where I wanted to start, and I want to get into what some of those questions are. Where does that really leave rehabilitation techniques when we talk about lead service lines? I want to briefly introduce our three panelists today, and then I'd like to go to all three of you for a brief introduction to kind of, again, just set the table on our expertise and where we're coming at this discussion. So first we have Alan Roberson, Executive Director of the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. We have Grant Whittle, Technical Director with New Flow, and we have Jeff Tanner, President and Chief Technical Officer at Flowliner Systems. So gentlemen, really appreciate you joining me. And as we've chatted a little bit about this topic, as I said, I've kind of pleaded my ignorance on the topic. I'm just going to ask questions, and we'll see where the discussion goes. I encourage our attendees on with us to submit questions. You guys can submit questions in the questions box. I'm going to be monitoring those, and we can definitely, this is a great time to ask these panelists some questions on sort of the regulatory end, what's going on in the pipeline industry with regards to lead service lines. Alan, let's start with you. If you wouldn't mind, give us a quick introduction as to your role, what you're working on right now as it relates to the topic of lead and kind of what you're seeing.
Thanks, Andrew. Again, my name is Alan Roberson. I'm Executive Director of the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, otherwise known as ASDWA. We're a small, nonpartisan nonprofit located in the DC area. And when I say small, and that we only have 57 members, and that would be all 50 states, 5 territories, DC, and the Navajo Nation. And these members are the state agency that implement the Safe Drinking Water Act. So they are the ones that work with the water systems on compliance, technical assistance, operator certification, lab certification, and the money, the state revolving fund. So they're considered the co-regulators with EPA. EPA sets the standards, the numerical standards, and then our state agencies have to pass regulations that are as strict as the federal standard. And so we're intimately involved with the IIJ funding as well as the implementation of the lead and copper rule revisions. So we're working closely with EPA on the development of their inventory guidance. We put out our own implementation framework for the states on inventories in February. We're looking at some other information on replacements and getting it out to the states because they're in the midst of trying to get grant applications from the systems for the inventories and replacements, and then fold those into an intended use plan to go to EPA to get the first year of money. So this first slug of money has to be distributed to the states for lead service line replacements by September 30th, the end of the fiscal year. So, between, June, July, August, September, 4 months, there's a whole lot of work to finish up those intended use plans, get them reviewed and approved, and get the money, and then eventually get it out to the systems, and they can start doing the work. So that's a 2-minute intro, Andrew.
Perfect. Grant, we'll come to you next.
Sorry about that. I had myself muted. My name is Grant Whittle. I am the technical director at NewFlow. I've been in the industry since 1995. A few years back, about a decade or so ago, I went back to Virginia Tech to help with a research project and was a student there and worked alongside the students. I was in a separate research area under aging water infrastructure, but was in the same classes in the same research program with all the students focused on the lead and water under Dr. Mark Edwards. So this has been a personal interest area of mine for years, even before I joined a company that's now recently getting involved in lead service lines.
All right, very good. And Jeff, come to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. My name is Jeff Tanner. I'm President and Chief Technical Officer at Flowliner. Flowliner specializes in manufacturing and installation of small diameter trenchless technologies for pipes and conduits. We started installing expandable pressure pipe, which we call EPP, under the trade name Neofit back in 2008 for leaking potable service lines, mainly from the street to the house. We haven't had any failures with the installations since our first installation over a decade ago. EPP was invented back in Europe in the early 90s as a barrier for drinking water and lead pipes. And this is what got us interested in EPP. We did the first pilot in the US back in 2008. It was for Louisville Water. Revisited the pilot a decade later with excellent test results. And I think, Alan, you worked with the Water Research Foundation on the report, 2016 report that we had. And then, of course, Flint, Michigan, that crisis happened. And lead pipes received a lot more attention. So since then, we've been trying to get the word out about how EPP can improve water quality, remove lead from our drinking water. We've answered hundreds of questions from EPA about this technology. And we believe water authorities need to utilize this product in their replacement programs due to its cost saving and high efficiency capabilities.
All right, very good. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, guys. So as you guys can kind of see here, we have Alan with the Association of State Drinking Waters, and Alan, you kind of, I feel like you really watch these issues. You kind of see this obviously from the state level, and you kind of follow the regulatory side of this. And then with Grant and Jeff, I think you guys are a little bit more of our representatives here from the underground construction side, underground pipeline side of things. So I think with considering that dynamic here with our panel, I want to kind of continue setting the table. So Alan, maybe you could just give us an overview then as we kind of continue to introduce our topic here. We mentioned the lead and copper rule. Walk us through what exactly is required as far as replacement. Do the lead and copper rule revisions require full replacement of lead service lines? Is that accurate? Does that leave any room for any other, rehabilitation methods? Just give us kind of the broad overview on the requirements.
Yeah. So, the first thing that systems are being required to do now under the lead and copper revisions are the inventories. The idea is you need to go out and find where the lines are. Now, there are a lot of systems that have started on this. They know what they're doing. There are several systems that have full replacements going on already. But everyone has to start on the inventories and have those ready by October of 2024. And then the requirements right now are the same. If you have a lead action level exceedance, then you have to replace 3% a year. Right now, though, that's under review by EPA. They are going to propose a rule called the Lead and Copper Rule Improvements, and that is something that I think personally is likely going to change. And I think they will move toward a mandatory percentage removal and then maybe an increased percentage if you have an action level exceedance. But that's just speculation at this point. But right now, the focus is on inventories and then when you find a replacement. And what you're saying is right. The rule is pretty clear from my point of view on its full replacement. And the language of the law is the same, that the money goes for identification and replacement of lead service lines and fittings. So that takes care of goosenecks and pigtails. So again, I just think that's the way I read both the regulatory language in the lead and copper rule revisions plus the statutory language that's in the new funding law.
What I mean, and you're pretty well versed. And again, Alan, just to kind of follow up, I want to just make sure we kind of cover. So, I mean, what is this pretty much the way things, started going after Flint, or what kind of discussions do you think, kind of were there at more of the regulatory level about, or was this a pretty straightforward decision to focus on replacement, or where along the lines did that become just kind of the, what the goal should be? And
that's a good question. I definitely think one point that is exactly spot on is that Flint in itself, I think, fundamentally changed a lot of how people look at drinking water. And that's not just the public, but even the oversight that our members got, not just from EPA, but from the press and the public and what they're doing. And so replacements have just always been the de facto way to make it change. And I'll let Grant and Jeff maybe talk a little more about their perspective. I think that if you think about it, water utilities and EPA are what I'd say they're risk averse. And so, while this technology's been used in Europe and I've even seen a demo myself in Providence maybe a decade ago, it's just, everyone in this sector, I'm an engineer by training, we're risk averse. The water systems, they're municipal companies, are risk averse. And EPA, I think they're risk averse. And so, it's hard for me to assess. People knew about this technology, but it never really just broke into the rulemaking process. And I think Grant and Jeff may have their own perspective on that, and I'll leave it at that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Grant, let's just come to you then for you. Maybe tell us a little bit more again about your kind of work as it relates to lead, what New Flow is working on, and again, just maybe from your point of view, walk us through maybe quickly what some of these systems are. I mean, Jeff mentioned, expandable pressure pipe, right. Give us an overview of how these systems work. We call it a rehabilitation method, but is it, is it getting the lead out, so to speak? What you give us an overview on basically how these kind of work for people involved in the trenchless market, who may not be familiar with some of these systems.
Sure. And along with that, a little background. The company that I work for, New Flow, we work with over 200 plumbing contractors in North America, around 300 worldwide. We do more of this type of small diameter pipe rehabilitation than any other company in the world. And so obviously we have seen the issue with lead service lines and have worked to acquire technologies that can address it, as well as developing technologies. We're very familiar with the NeoFit system, which has significant experience already in the marketplace. We work together with water utilities in the UK that came to us regarding their lead service line issues and how they wanted to address the lead service line issues. And we developed a system called Surline that is a hybrid polyurethane polyurea that is applied with an air vortex into the inside diameter from 1/2 inch up to 3-inch lead service lines. And we've done over 14,000 lead service lines with the water agencies over in the UK, have all of our national approvals, regulatory approvals, and have our NSF 61 in place. And we are preparing to introduce that technology to North America as well. We have one statewide approval for pilot projects in place in the Great Lakes region We had a pilot project already lined up to move forward when COVID hit, and we had visa issues with the COVID crisis that have delayed that pilot project. But essentially, from our experience over in the UK that we've already had, nearly a decade's worth of experience, we're able, in the projects we've been doing in the UK, we've been able to get 10 to 15 service lines a day done at about a third of the cost and 3 to 4 times the productivity rate of any replacement methods. And the result has been the utilities over there have actually been able to replace the water mains or rehabilitate the water mains at the same time we're rehabilitating the lead service laterals for the same price that they were paying to replace the lead service lines alone. So it's an extremely cost-effective, efficient process. And NeoFit as well is an efficient process. And these types of technologies, they have the potential to be a game changer for solving this issue. When we're looking at generational exposure to lead by children, the EPA is suggesting it's going to take 75 years to completely resolve this issue with replacement. For many of the smaller agencies that say have 5,000 lead service lines in their system, they're still expecting 20 years. And there is the potential with the same construction capacity, the same budgets, that we could get the lead service lines replaced in a third of the time. And when you're looking at generational childhood exposures to lead, that is huge. So this is technology that's been proven in programs in other parts of the world. It's just, and it's had some pilots here, such as with NeoFit, as was mentioned, has already had some pilot projects showing the effectiveness of these rehabilitation techniques. In my discussions with authorities on the regulatory side and from the agency side, the primary concern has been, how do you verify after rehabilitation that there is no lead exposure? And that concern arises, what if there were to be a pinhole? What if there were to be some damage and the lead is still there? In the destructive testing we did on the pilot projects over in the UK, we consistently had undetectable levels. And I'll go back to the known multiple generations of children that are going to have full lead exposure from the lead service lines if it takes longer to get it done. So I think it's more of even though it's an understandable risk adverse concern, I think the risk is actually higher from mandating full replacement. It's going to leave more children exposed to way more levels of lead over time than having rehabilitation options available.
All right, Jeff, I'd like to hear from you a little bit. Same question, just on your perspective on what you're seeing in the market, whether it's what Flowliner works on or just beyond that, with some of these systems that are available, and almost what Grant said. What are some of the when you guys complete some of these jobs, what are some of the questions that you might get about likelihood of lead exposure after the rehabilitation?
Sure. Number one, I agree with everything that Grant's saying. The current way that we're handling this lead crisis is going to take decades. The inventory alone is going to be a very difficult thing for water authorities to deal with, let alone doing the replacement and being inside of people's homes for days or hours on time, and very difficult financially for these water authorities. Myself, I don't know how they're going to do it. And like Grant said, meanwhile, children, families are being exposed to this right now as we speak. But it's like a lot of things that are out of sight, out of mind. People have a tendency to not look at that importance, but it's very important. And I think the water authorities need every tool in their toolbox, including Grant's system, our system. There's some other systems out there that will work much faster in removing lead from drinking water. So when you hear, I hear, well, you need to get the lead out. Need to get the lead out. I agree. You need to get it out of the water. It doesn't necessarily have to come out of the ground. It's just a very, very hard thing to get people to realize when they don't see something how important this is. We've done many installations, we've had a lot of questions from engineers from all over different states that I've went to. And that was one of the questions that Grant brought up was, the concern is, well, what's the longevity of the product? And our answer, and how do you know if the product's still working? So those are two of the main questions that we've dealt with, and that the EPA has also asked us. And what we have is we can actually install an inspection port at the meter setting if need be. And you can check the integrity of the liner. If water comes out of that inspection port, it can be tested at that point. And then that answered one engineer's question in Indiana. And then he even said, well, you wouldn't have to do that to every house. And I said, no. I said, we go by the batch numbers of the pipes, and we could do it, one per street, one per every 100 households. A lot of different ways you can do it. But that was one answer that we had that seemed to satisfy that particular engineer, and that we've also told the EPA. Longevity wise, we use a virgin PET, polyethylene terephthalate. We've had scientific reports done that this material will exceed 100 years in service. Because the other question from EPA came was that, well, when the lead pipe deteriorates, we're estimating 100 years, then your product's not going to be any good anymore. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me anyway, because at that time, if the hose pipe deteriorates, then it's going to have to be replaced. But our product will last as long as that lead pipe, and it'll act as a barrier. Now that we have scientific proof that it will be there for 100+ years. So that was another hard answer to get in the research, and now it's scientific. So it's not a Band-Aid. It's not something that's temporary. It's something that's going to be in there for a very long time, and now it can be monitored. So that's kind of where we're at. How that evolved.
All right. So yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to some of that. So Alan, I want you to, if you want to respond to that, one other thing I was just kind of thinking of, does to your knowledge, does EPA, Alan, have they put out any projections as to, seeing as how the first part of this being the inventory, and then whatever that determines the rate of needed replacement, have there been any projections as to, how long that might take for us to get to so yeah.
No, I mean, I wish.
No.
What the capacity of the workforce is to do this, it's really, we're all having, it's not a question of supply chain actually, because copper, hypothetically, if we're replacing with copper, the copper industry is happy to sell service line as much as we need, but it's going to be trained plumbing contractors. They can go in there and know how to do that. In some cases like Newark, given the soil area, they were able to pull out the lead service line and then pull a copper behind it. That was based on a couple things. One, their soil conditions, and they'll admit that every now and then they had one they couldn't pull, and they'd have to dig the whole yard up to get it out. And then they also passed an ordinance that gave them the ability to go on private property. They had a lot of renters there. They found that 75% of the people were renters of the property, and they had trouble contacting the homeowner, so that they just passed an ordinance saying that the utility could go on private property and replace the whole line. That's a unique situation. And so they were able to crank it, and even on, I think they had 7 crews running. They got up to 120, 130 a day, and that was their top when they had it all optimized. And so, if you have a city like Chicago, I'll just pick one, and a lot of big cities in the upper Midwest where you've got hundreds of thousands of them, at 120 a day, and even, you go to 520 a day or 1,000 a day, it's a lot of days. And so EPA hasn't done that estimate. And so I think it's going to vary. There are systems like Cincinnati and DC Water that have been doing this for years. What the issue they may run into is they may have to be going back now and replacing private sides. A lot of them just did the public side at the time. So there's a lot of nuances. I think the funding will make a dent in it. We'll take a lot out, but I think there'll still be a lot left to do after the 5 years of funding that have been provided by Congress.
Right. And Alan, maybe you could just also give us where does the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act play into this? Can you just give us a quick overview on the funding provided in there for lead replacement? Like, again, how much is there? And again, that's strictly for replacement.
Yeah, there's essentially $15 billion specifically targeted to lead service lines for the inventories and replacements. There's other funding for emerging contaminants and the traditional drinking water state revolving fund, but 5 slugs of $3 billion a year that'll be allocated in the same way as the traditional state revolving fund. And again, the first year will be coming out by September 30th. So, again, there's an estimate that there's 6 to 10 million lead service lines in the country. No one's tried to estimate how many that 5 billion will get, because you can also use the money for inventories, and there'll be some that'll be spent that way. And so, I'm guessing maybe a quarter or a third, but that's just a guess, Andrew. You start doing the math and saying, is it going to be 7,000 or 10,000 or 17,000? That's how you do the math, and you can figure it out. And I think the variability, even if you get capacity, everyone's just seeing price increases in the construction market, if nothing more than just the price of gas for the trucks to get to the site and the heavy equipment to get to the site. And so I think we're going to see higher costs than what was estimated as we go through the replacements.
Right. So, and one thing, and one more follow up for you, Alan, because I before we get back to Grant and Jeff, I just want to make sure we're getting past some of these questions again. So when Grant and Jeff kind of talk about some of these, the benefits of some of these rehab systems, I mean, so I guess I'm not understanding is with the lead and copper rule revisions. I mean, do municipalities, do they have any authority then to do their, to choose what systems they use, or is that, do they have to abide by lead and copper rule? I mean, where does the legal side of that is maybe what I'm not understanding.
Yeah. And again, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I don't play one on TV, but I mean, I think that my understanding is that they have limited flexibility, if any, again, given sort of the way the rule's been structured in the funding, I can see maybe some uses for it, and it's unfortunate, but it may be considered like temporary,
Sure.
if you do this. And then the irony is, and it probably really grates on Jeff and Grant's ears, is that you'd have to replace a line pipe, pull it out of the ground after a few years, however many years later, after you've got a material, as Jeff said, that could last 100 years. I don't know if it's exactly what you said, Jeff, but a long time. It's the concern is that it could last longer than the pipe. And so I have an engineering background. I get all this, but it's just kind of the sausage making in DC sometimes that things like this can happen.
Right. Grant, do you want to jump in here and to respond to? And I guess I'm wondering then, with that being said, Grant, where else, where along the lines is the hang up occurring from your perspective then?
Getting people to understand that rehabilitation provides just as high of protection as replacement is going to be a regulatory hurdle in this situation. We are working towards educating both EPA and the AWWA membership. But we're looking at like City of Milwaukee did an estimate that there is $63.32 billion cost of replacement. And as Alan was explaining, that's probably low for replacement with all of the ancillary costs and the inflation pressures that we're under and labor cost pressures we're under. Our company's internal estimate when we were looking at this is it'll be about 41 billion with rehabilitation. And yet our productivity rate advantages when we actually started doing projects in the UK was much higher than that, actually, where we could bring the cost down even potentially further. But there's the AWWA estimates there's over 6.55 million lead service lines still remaining to be replaced. They estimated that back in 2016, and out of 7 to 10 million lead pipes in North America. There is a lot to be done. We believe that rehabilitation has some major advantages for the public and for the agencies, and we hope that we can get it considered. We do realize that when it comes to the federal funding right now, the LCR is clear, but the federal funding is only a small portion of the total amount of work that needs to be done. There is work to work with the states for statewide approvals, for pilot projects, and for technology validation verification that could lead to funding in the future, but the cities are going to have to fund a lot themselves anyway over the next 25 to 70 years. And I apologize, I misspoke earlier. I said 75 years. The US EPA estimate was 70 years. I looked up my data on that. It was a 70-year estimate to get all the lead service lines replaced. So,
hey, Andrew, I hate to jump in here, but I have an idea that it just dawned on me how we might, that these two may be able to make it work. So I mentioned previously about the lead and copper rule improvements. So EPA is looking at proposing a rule in 23 next year and go final before the current deadline. Mm-hmm. From Alan's point of view and working in the regulatory process for 30 years, that's a window to submit data, and that's a window to continue. So I just encourage you to continue to do pilots and submit data, because again, I'm just thinking out loud here. It dawned on me, and it didn't. I haven't prepped on this. It just kind of hit me when the conversation is, they're going to propose different options, and this to me now is an opportunity for these two gentlemen and other people that do this rehabilitation to submit data and say, hey, ask for public comment on this, and emphasize the time frame, the cost savings, the exposure reduction, all the things we've talked about today. If you can get it into the final LCRI, then I think that's a change. And again, that's just, I wasn't planning on giving you regulatory advice, but it just kind of clicked on me when we were having this conversation.
All help we can get.
Yeah.
And that's appreciated. We definitely will be pursuing that, and we are pursuing presentations to the US EPA Office of Research, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to present more to the AWWA membership, et cetera. But ultimately, we think these rehabilitation technologies will have a huge role to play just from a construction capacity, available construction capacity standpoint, and the ability to act quickly to help resolve this issue at the individual homeowner level. But I'd like to raise one other issue that doesn't seem to get addressed widely. It is one of the things that, while we're addressing the service lines to the house, that's what the law covers. What the law doesn't cover is the building pipes themselves. And one of the challenges when we do these projects, and when we've done our pilot projects, you have to test at the end of the section that you've rehabilitated, whether or replaced. You have to test just the section you have rehabilitated or replaced, because if you test at the tap in the house, unfortunately, you're still likely to see high levels of lead, because the iron pipes, the copper pipes with the lead solder, the scale in the iron pipes actually aggregates lead over time out of the water. And the highest levels of lead that we actually see in testing the exposures to the children is actually where iron scaling is released, gets caught on the aerator at the sink, and you can get high enough levels of lead from that iron scaling with the aggregated lead in it. You can get high enough levels of lead in a single glass of water to cause a spontaneous abortion. That will still remain in the scaling of those iron pipes inside the building, even after we rehabilitate or replace the lead pipes. So this is not just a silver bullet fix of the whole problem. We're talking about spending who knows how much money over the next 70 years, up to the next 70 years, replacing all these lead pipes. And the older housing inventory where pipe replacement inside the house is not really a viable financial option. In the poorest communities, the most the hardest hit communities with the lead problems, quite frankly, this is not necessarily, as the law is currently written, going to fully address that, if even really change the lead exposures of the children that much at each individual household. So there's more to address than just the pipes. The pipes are part of the permanent fix, but it's not the complete solution.
Mm-hmm. So, Jeff, I want to get you back in here again and respond to some things Grant just said and add some more from your perspective. Again, where does the ultimate hang up occur with your discussions with clients? And just as a follow up to that, and not to make everything, I don't want to, obviously there's options out there beyond. Grant and Jeff's companies, but just by way of example here, we're also getting another a question here. Techniques for relining pipe, are they NSF approved? So Jeff, maybe you could just respond and just address that really quickly.
Yeah. Yes, our expandable pressure pipe is NSF 61 approved. It's also NSF 61 approved for immediate return to service. So once the product is installed, we do recommend flushing the line out, but it can be immediately returned to service. Okay. And as Grant knows, NSF 61 is a very hard certification to get, and it's very expensive. So to answer that question, yes, it is.
Just as a clarification, what size do y'all go down to in your NSF 61 certification?
1/2 inch.
Same with the PUs, the hybrid PUs that we use with our Sirline process. Yep. NSF 61 approved for immediate return to service and approved down to 1/2 inch.
Yep.
Okay.
Very similar. And to answer Alan's, which I agree with you, Alan. I think that's a great window for us to convince the EPA to help these water authorities have more options on removal of lead in their water. But the brick wall that we continuously have hit is when we talk to states and local water authorities, they look for the EPA, the federal EPA, for guidance, and it just hasn't been there. We have communities that are interested in pilot programs right now, but EPA is giving no guidance on pilot programs for our product. It's very frustrating, and I know it's frustrating for the water authorities. So, we've submitted all the data we can submit, and the only thing the EPA has come back with recently was, well, we'd like to see more pilots. So we say yes, we have communities interested in pilots, but there's no answer. And there's no guidance on how these pilots can be set up, if they're going to be able to use the funding that's available, if they're going to be exempt from the replacement programs while the pilot's going on. I think these are all legitimate questions that the EPA should address and answer, and it's been quiet, very quiet right now.
So I want to come back. To you, Alan. We're getting some more questions in from the audience, and I see a question here. When do you anticipate EPA to approve rehabilitation in the rule? So I just want to clarify that that's kind of what we're talking about here. It hasn't been approved in the rule to my knowledge at all, but that's kind of what we're getting at here is we're trying to find out if there's any room for any rehabilitation techniques, just to kind of clarify.
I think there's two paths, the one that Jeff talked about, I don't have an answer for. It's kind of the chicken and the egg. We need some pilots to be able to get the data to then make it acceptable as an alternative. I'll do what I can to at least get them to, hey, like, how might that work? Because we have a whole nother project looking at innovative treatment technology. This is kind of related, but it's a little bit different. But it's trying to figure out what role each species should be playing. And this is, to me, one example of there's a role for them and they're not meeting the role. The other window would be if we get information and data into have it proposed as an option in the LCRI next in 23, and then data submitted as part of the public comment period, and it lands in the final LCRI in 24. So there's a couple of years here that there's a window, maybe 2.5 years. And again, I hate to say good luck, but EPA is just challenged like our agencies are in trying to get all the stuff done, and our states are waiting on the inventory guidance just like the systems are at this point. So again, EPA is just, I think, stretched real thin and trying to get all this done. But I do hear what these two gentlemen say, and it should be a tool, and it should be a tool that's at least evaluated better maybe in this round of rulemaking than it was in the last one.
Yeah, Alan, I was just wondering, you kind of just answered my question a little bit there, but I was just wondering, a little aside from that, what are some of the main challenges that state agencies are having at the moment that you guys are really seeing a lot of? Maybe it's separate from the, lead pipe rehab or replacement discussion, but just overall in terms of, the overseeing lead and copper rule compliance or we heard a lot in Water Week about the, infrastructure bill funds, and a lot of these state agencies are just kind of overwhelmed with the distribution of funds. What are some of the broader challenges that are going on there at the state level?
There's a few, and I think one of them, the overwhelming, is a workforce issue that you're going to need more bodies at the state. States have, bureaucratic hiring processes. So there's straight up kind of workforce issues in trying to get it done. There's a lack of the inventory guidance for the lead and copper rule. We've been waiting on this guidance for a few months now, and it's starting to get critical because, again, the systems are trying to submit grant applications to the states to be part of that intended use plan to get that first round of funding. And it's hard to know, well, what do you need to include in that kind of plan? And so that kind of application. And so I think that and in the meantime, the states are trying to then do everything that they normally do. And so I think that the challenges that we're seeing now is that they're just getting a lot of questions, and everyone's having to figure it out on their own as they go and make it up as they go along.
Right.
If I can add something to that,
Sure.
Not only is there a need for the utility education, agency education, like you're talking about there, the resources available to them. I think we also need a national community education outreach program aimed at the homeowners. In my opinion, agencies are going to need a toolkit for hosting town hall meetings to help them properly explain what homeowners can do, need to do, the limitations of what these programs will actually achieve, and the additional measures that need to be taken by parents to protect their children in their homes. Right now, to my knowledge, there's no such toolkits available, and that type of educational outreach material needs to be developed.
Absolutely. We have another question here from the audience, guys, on just another question, just sort of on the pipe rehab replacement. Is it required to replace a non-lead line downstream of lead gooseneck? Alan, do you know that, or can you guys kind of jump on that?
Right now they do the term is galvanized required replacement. So you have a galvanized line that's downstream of a lead connector or gooseneck that you have to replace it. So when you're doing the inventory, they're looking at lead service line, galvanized required replacement, and then other or unknown. And so, that's one right now. You get nuances. If it's not galvanized, that may be a different kind of iron. There's some nuances there, but yeah, galvanized downstream of lead, it's got to come out.
Question here on cost. I mean, I know we touched on this a little bit, but this question here, as the EPA estimates about $6,000 to replace a lead service line. Grant and Jeff, without getting too specific here, just kind of in generalities, what do you guys generally estimate per line for a rehab? What do you guys estimate maybe the total cost would be on average?
Well, on our system, we look at it as a percentage. I think 6,000 is also pretty low. But if you're in northern states, those lines are sometimes 10 foot deep. They go underneath huge trees. You have front porches to deal with. You have to excavate inside the home. So I think 6,000 is probably on the low end of that, especially nowadays with inflation. But our system on average is going to be at least a 50% cost savings on full replacement. Plus, it takes less time in the house and less demolition, less damage. And there's going to be even more cost savings the deeper the line is. So your northern states, it'll be much more cost savings using our product.
And maybe a follow-up to that, we're getting another question here, and excuse my lack of engineering expertise here, but and maybe we kind of address this with the NSF certification question, but polyliner, has that been tested to make sure any kind of chemicals won't leach into the water? You guys address that, Jeff or Grant?
That's part of the NSF 61 certification.
Okay.
They test for certain leachates and ensure potable water safety.
Okay.
So all of us who've gone through NSF 61 have gone through that level of testing. There's a lot of questions these days about possible byproducts that aren't on the list to be tested. But within the window of what the regulatory agencies require, what is required for water safety in the USA, it's NSF 61.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would agree with Grant, and also, as I mentioned before, NSF 61 is a very, very difficult test to pass. It can't have any chemicals in it. Our product has no BPA in it. It's a very stringent test for drinking water. So it's known internationally.
And to pass it a 1/2-inch diameter where you have that much surface area to volume, that is really difficult for most plastics. The fact that these technologies are passing at a 1/2-inch tells a lot about just how little risk of leaching there is.
Okay. Another question here, and again, this is something that I think we've covered a little bit, so maybe we can just continue to recap here. Under the Safe Drinking Water Act, water systems must provide ratepayers with all available methods of mitigating lead in their drinking water. Expandable pressure pipe is an NSF certified method, so are water systems giving ratepayers choices? Well, I think again we've kind of it may not, the water systems may not have the authority here, right, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I think my response is it's EPA's decision. That again, this regulatory window that's open for a couple of years is a chance to get it in there, and hopefully we'll see how it plays out, and we can get some additional data in. Because again, me being an engineer, I'm curious. I want to see the data. If it's a tool in the toolbox, let's get it in the toolbox. Some areas will do all replacements, some will do both, and I think the faster we can get it out, get the lead out, get the lead out of the water, as Grant says and Jeff says, I think that's important.
And another one for Grant and Jeff here are utility. And again, this is another one that this maybe just help us kind of recap just the overview of the topic. But are there any utilities in the United States using these relining products? And so again, I know there's some applications beyond municipal But maybe just give an overview, Grant. You know, what you guys do have a lot of utility clients. You know, what are the on the utility side? How much are some of these methods being used in the United States right now?
In the case of the hybrid polyurethane coating systems, they are new to North America. We've been using them in the UK for close to a decade, but they are new to North America. We have only just gotten the visas and the personnel over to North America to begin pursuing the pilot projects. In the case of a technology like NeoFit, as Jeff was explaining earlier, they have done pilot projects with quite a few cities around North America. I've seen it used in plumbing systems for private property owners as well. And it's a fairly well-recognized technology in the industry, and at least on the plumbing side. So it's got a lot of potential for these programs, just as the hybrid polyurethane coatings have a lot of potential for these programs. We just need the opportunity to satisfy the regulators' concerns. And as I said, the only concerns we've heard so far are that there is no safe level of lead, and if there's any risk at all of any lead, even undetectable levels, then we don't want it. And yet there is lead in the house piping that's not being addressed. There's generations of children exposed to unrehabilitated, unreplaced pipes because of the budgetary concerns. And that argument just doesn't seem to match up with the public health crisis that's trying to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. We have another question here. I'm not sure. Do these techniques work successfully with GRR? Jeff, I don't know. Can you address that one?
It's galvanized requiring replacement is what the GRR is. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought I'd throw that out there just because, again, I know it. You answer. I gave you the acronyms.
And I appreciate that. Yes, we have installed our product in galvanized piping. Galvanized is a little challenging because of the tuberculi and the corrosion buildup, but we have successfully installed it in galvanized piping. It might take a little longer for the cleaning, but the answer to the question is yes, we have.
And that's where you get into other the cleaning technologies becomes key when we start getting into scaled pipes. And we've got different aggregates for different types of cleaning needs that we can use an air vortex to blow that aggregate through. And we capture and collect everything with dust protection in the process, and can prepare galvanized pipes to be clean enough to either coat or pull a liner like NeoFit in, the EPP type liners. That we have the technologies to clean the pipes well enough, but that's what's key to making that work. And new acronym for me, GRR.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we're past the 3 o'clock hour. I know we started a little bit late. I want to just maybe just really quick, just take it around one more time for any just concluding, any little, just brief concluding thoughts that you guys might have on this topic. Anything we want to just leave our audience with. We've gone through quite a bit of questions that came in from our attendees, and just kind of seeing some of these questions, I think it just kind of shows that how many questions are out there. I mean, I'm seeing another one that just came in. EPA says it's the state's decision. States say it's the EPA's decision. Who's in charge? So there's certainly some questions on all this. But Alan, any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just hope that these gentlemen and other providers out there can continue to generate more data and get it in the EPA so it's considered in this upcoming regulatory window. Because again, more tools in the toolbox. We're having to figure out different tools for the inventories. Let's try and see what different tools we can have for the replacements or rehab. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Grant, any concluding thoughts there?
Ultimately, I hope we don't lose sight that this is all about the children. They're the ones that are having the health impacts. It's critical that we get the lead out, particularly during that developmental period of children up to age like 10 and 12 they don't end up with the developmental issues. I know that there was permanent loss of IQ points that was documented from the lead crisis that happened in Washington, D.C. prior to Flint. Over 100,000 children were exposed to lead and water at high levels for an extended period. And we need to get this corrected as fast as is feasible and do everything we can to protect the children. That's the goal.
Yep.
Very good. Jeff?
I agree with Grant again. And my main frustration, as I said before, is, we've submitted so much data to EPA. And their last remark was, well, there needs to be more pilots here in the U.S. And now that we have communities interested in pilots, we need some guidance from them on how to proceed with these. And these communities that are wanting these pilots should have some type of incentive, whether it's, like I said before, whether those pipes are exempt from replacement until the pilot is accepted. But some type of guidance that we need right now, because that's where we're at with the EPA. We've answered all their questions, and we're down to pilot programs.
Yeah. All right, guys. Very good. We'll leave it right there. I think that was a successful discussion. Obviously, there's some different ideas out there, and solving this equation isn't easy. There's politics involved in this particular topic, as we know, and there's some different perspectives, and we're just trying to figure out the best way to move forward. So, gentlemen, really appreciate you taking some time. Apologies again for the technical difficulties at the start, but glad we were able to get this in. For all of our attendees on with us, I'd like to thank you for sticking with us and for joining this entire month to check out these sessions. Really hope you were able to get something out of them. Really quick, I do want to mention, as you should be seeing on your screens, we do want to give a quick plug for our Water Finance Conference, August 17th and 18th in Washington, D.C. We're going to be back in person for this conference. We've done it virtually, kind of like this the last couple of years, but we're going to be back in person. That's a conference where we have some similar discussions to this, but the content is geared a little bit more towards the finance crowd, the utility CFOs. So definitely check out our website to see. We're going to be releasing a lot of our speakers and the agenda next month. I want to offer our Water Asset Management Conference attendees a 25% discount off attendance. So we're going to be sending another email about that out to our attendees who are on with us today and have joined us this month. So that's just for attendees of this conference. So really appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to maybe seeing you in DC. And so Alan, Grant, Jeff, it's great talking to you guys. Thanks for joining us. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.